inviting me. It's going to be a great conversation tonight. So I want to echo what my colleagues. We're on this journey. We're always going forward, and sometimes we'll take a step forward and a step back, and that's the same thing is true with cybersecurity, and especially with elections. So I may get into this a little bit later, but we've taken great strides in what we've done in the election process and verifying the integrity of every vote from years past to what we have today. I believe that we're on the right track, and all will go well with the casting of every ballot and then the collection and the tabulation all through the night and the days ahead as we go forward. Most cybersecurity experts, myself included, agree that the actual votes cast is probably the hardest thing to hack throughout the whole process. It's the most difficult. Actually, the chances of someone, tampering with your personal vote are extremely slim. I mean, it's possible. Anything's possible, but it's not very plausible, and it's highly likely that if you were voting for candidate A, that someone would kind of jump in and do a cybersecurity attack and change it to candidate B in the process. That's probably the least amount of concern that I would have, but I will highlight my top 4 cybersecurity concerns. And one that I've written about before, and I've talked about it in the past, is the actual voter registration databases. I think this is the most vulnerable, and I'll circle back around to that in a second, because these are managed by county governments all across the nation. And it's something to keep in mind that the actual conduction of the elections and the certification and the actual tabulation is done by local governments, on the county level. It's not done at the federal level or even at the state level. So, and a lot of these county governments may not have the resources and the cybersecurity resources and technologies to do the adequate preparation. So any tampering with the voter registration databases could have happened months or years in advance prior to the election. So that's a big concern. The other concerns that I have is really doesn't have anything to do with your actual vote itself. There's a lot of things that are going on around that could have some voter fraud or election fraud. Has nothing to do with the actual vote. It comes through disinformation that could be put out and voter suppression. While your vote itself could be protected through cybersecurity information, there's a lot of other things today. And this is a perfect timing because I was actually a victim of one of these social engineering scams today. I received a robocall saying, hey, this is from your local CDC department, and the coronavirus COVID-19 cases are extremely high. We encourage you to stay home. And your local government, your state has extended the polling times, and we'll recommend you go vote tomorrow. Of course, it was a robocall, and I knew that wasn't the case, so I actually hung up. So I know if I received that call, millions of other ones probably did as well. So that is a form of cybersecurity attack. In the cybersecurity world, we want to think that there's this person in the basement turning all the nerd knobs and hitting the geek buttons and all this hacking through the firewall. But it's really not how it happens in today's world. It's really more about social engineering and the weakest link for everyone. And typically the weakest link is the human factor, and that's no different in election security as well. So the social media, the robocalls that I talked about, that seems to be a concern. Any type of disinformation that gets in the minds of voters, or this happened or this didn't happen, which will prevent someone from going to vote because, your vote may not be secure because of this or that, or it's dangerous to go vote. So that's a concern. And like I said, it's not necessarily changing your vote, but it could prevent your vote or possibly even sway how you would have voted. So that's an issue. A third one that I have a concern with is the actual disruption of county services, which is an all-day, everyday concern for cybersecurity. But I think it's even a little more heightened during election time and on election night. So a lot of the county governments that have their results brought into the courthouse to do the tabulation, if they have some type of a weak cybersecurity posture and there's a ransomware or denial of service attack or anything that disrupts that service to that county government, then or parish type courthouse, then the actual tabulation could be halted. It could be stopped. It take a while to do that, or the results could be improperly reported out to the news media, which is inaccurate. And the last one that I'll stop here and we'll circle back around is websites monitoring real-time election results. We know that's going to be millions of Americans out there searching the internet, looking at who's winning and who's losing. And that's a prime picking ground for cyber criminals and nefarious actors out there. They will spin up fake websites delivering fake news or accurate news more times than not. This is real, accurate, live results, but it's a malicious website that's actually affecting malware on all these victims' computers. So there's some cybersecurity concerns, but not so much with the actual vote itself. It's the whole election ecosphere around it. And if the conversation goes forward a little bit later, I can kind of talk, answer your second part of your question of the actual process itself and what the machines are like and how that works. We'll get into that, but I want to hear from my colleague Neil for a second.
That's great. Bill, if I can just jump in, I love how you put this, and we've talked about cybersecurity before, and what drives me bananas, and especially on a night like tonight, it's like, what's really going on in this country, right? You see one thing, but something else is going on. So people are freaking out about the votes being tampered, but in fact, what we really should be freaking out about are services being disrupted and hackers coming into our traditional municipal governments all around the country. Votes are basically okay. So we should go to the polls and we should vote. And I think the votes are counting. From what I can see, it's coming in. The other thing that's driving me crazy thinking about today is we're all talking about how there isn't democratic representation. I feel as though there might not be this golden era, as Celeste was saying, that we can turn to and look to, but there are a lot of people working hard every day, especially at the local level, but below the national level, where people are getting very involved in government, and especially local government, far more than they were 20 years ago. And a lot of that has to do with technology. I mean, think of just a basic system like 311. Or 311 didn't exist 20 years ago. And now you have the ability to call government and ask what's going on and see how to get connected and plugged in. Think about all these natural disasters we have here in the Southeast. All these hurricanes have come up, and social media have allowed us to jump in and work in coordination with government. There are things like participatory budgeting that's going on. There are technology-oriented kiosks that are bringing people in. And I have to say, as someone who works with mayors every day, and these were the first people I called after Trump got elected in 2016, they said, you know what? It's Wednesday. It's like any other Wednesday. And our mission and our job is to get people included. So I think what's frustrating for me about a day like today from a democracy perspective is there's all this heightened focus on voting. And what I'm really hoping is that focus then translates into how can we build on a lot of the other governance reforms that we have been seeing in this country that in a way I feel has been catalyzed to a degree by Trump, by new technologies, by a desire and a passion to get more involved. And so I'm kind of hoping that as we keep scrolling and looking at those votes coming in, we use that passion to say, how do we begin to rebuild whoever wins tomorrow, to keep including ourselves and to do what Bill was saying and what Celeste was saying, which is to say, well, what is really going on out there? Let's get away from those words like truth and facts, but what's happening? See, around culture, around participation, and around security. But Halima, I'm sorry, I kind of jumped in because I was so encouraged by Celeste and Bill. I didn't know if you wanted to steer us.
No, this is great. I love that you all are having this dialogue with one another, and that the things that you're sharing are prompting you to think about other areas. So really go with it. I appreciate it. It's wonderful, wonderful.
Let me throw something else out there, and I'm kind of curious what the panelists think. Another thing I've been thinking about today as we're all glued, hopefully, to this event now, but prior to this event, looking at the results coming in, it's like, what is it that we're looking at? We're not looking, of course, at national results. We're looking at state results. And to me, this is where I don't think we've advanced much as a country or as a citizenry, right? Is that we live in a federalist democracy, which means that states have coterminous powers with the federal government. It shouldn't be every 4 years that our eyes are glued to what the states are doing and how they're voting and what they're up to. And I was also thinking about Tulane and also at my home institution at NYU, how many courses are there anywhere, and institutions of higher learning on state politics, on state policy, intergovernmental relations, any of that, right? How many books are there that are assigned by us as instructors looking at state policy, but yet we're obsessed with looking at the state results in this country, as we should be, because that is where a lot of the power lies. And so again, this is another one where I'm hoping that this orientation and this focus tonight on the states carries through tomorrow in terms of how do we stay active around state issues and around state policy.
Yeah, I would echo that. You know, I teach about education policy, and you know it's all local, and so you know that's something that I'm very passionate about in terms of trying to encourage people to see that politics is not just the presidency and it's not just Congress, and I've been fascinated tonight by not just the state results, but the county results, like looking really at the granular level. And I'm really excited about some of the local races here in New Orleans and seeing the outcomes and what's happening in, our DA's race and what's happening in all these judgeships and what's going on here. Yeah, I would say that, we have kind of made a turn in political science, some of us, to some of this, but not nearly enough. There's still a lot of focus on that, national level and the interest there. But I think we also are seeing with this election, particularly because of COVID, the focus on the fact that states run the election systems. And so, if you could vote by mail versus, you had to, and if you had to drop off your ballot, or like our early voting ended a week ago, but some people could early vote up through the weekend in other states. And, and I noticed people on social media asking like, why is there so much difference in how we vote and when we vote and what our ballots look like? And I think that sort of heightens the importance of the local and state as well. So hopefully there, that I agree, Neil, that'd be great if we can, get people to see how important local politics and how exciting and interesting local politics is too.
Let me jump in there and echo some of these thoughts around the diversity across our nation, especially on the electoral process and with the county government. There's some different technologies. When I first got involved with this, I was heavily involved in the county election process, and we did paper ballots all across, the county. And it was the old days where everybody would fill out a ballot, stick it in the secret ballot box, drive it to the courthouse at night, and then you would scan them. And we would call it the spanking machine. We would really get hundreds of thousands of ballots running through the spanking machine, and I operated the spanking machine. Now, it was really a high-speed scanner, but it was nicknamed the spanking machine because it spank all the paper ballots. So, but there was a problem with that. The problem was incorrect the filling out of the ballot. So, someone would write somebody's name all the way across the thing, or put 2 circles instead of 3 circles, and it would end up with a lot of ballots. Unfortunately, quite a few. I've had during the nights where I've counted election results, we would throw away hundreds of votes, because the scanner couldn't read the ballot, and we couldn't go back to the voter and ask them to redo it because this is hours later and that's invalid. So, it ended up being overvotes and undervotes. Overvote is you voted for 3 races, three candidates, and you only can pick one, and that kind of thing. So that vote is capped out. Undervote is just the opposite. So with the Help the America Vote Act, and around 2002, 2003, I think, it was a big push. All counties across the nation was to do electronic style voting. So Halima, if you don't mind, can I share a screen real quick? I want to show a graphic here that kind of highlights this. This is something that I was involved. Can we see this website here? It's verified voting is where I pulled it from. All right, so this is, I'm on 2006. So the green, this isn't Democrat, Republican, green, red, blue. This is the red, maroon, that kind of thing is electronic style voting, and the green is your old school paper style voting. So you'll see a lot of these eastern states here was kind of going towards that. You would think with technology, when the technologies that would increase, but because there's not a verifiable paper trail or paper audit, that's important for cybersecurity. If you need to go back and journal and recount a vote, that paper ballot can do that. But if it's all electronic, it's not. So let me just go through, I'm gonna speed through this. 2010, you notice a lot of those reds go away. So let me go back to like 2006 here. You see California's kind of dipped into the electronic voting, but they go straight a couple years later, they're out of it. So watch this map as I transfer forward. And every one of these little squares, that's a different county. So you can see the diversity. Look at the state of Texas. Look at all that diversity at the local level. This is if they have electronic ballots, they have paper ballots, or they have ballot reading devices, you know, which is actually is an electronic thing, but it spits out a ballot or electronically fills it out for the voter. Let's move on up to we are now. You can see there's very little. There's if you look at the difference here from 2006, all this electronic voting, now 2020, very few. And I predict in the next election it's going to be even less. But this really highlights the difference in the diversity between at the local government level of how you count votes, how the votes are cast. Is it on an electronic ballot? Or if it is an electronic, does it spit out a paper ballot at the end or does it not? I do want to highlight our great state of Louisiana here. It's completely red, not because of party affiliation. It's red according to this map, this legend. It's a DRE is a direct recording electronic vote without a verifiable paper trail. It's the only state in the nation that's 100% that way. You'll see there's some other state of Texas. There's plenty of counties that way, but not the whole state. Our neighboring state, Mississippi, there's a few counties that are not. Louisiana is the only one that's 100%. All counties have electronic voting without a verifiable paper trail. So it just kind of highlights the vast diversity we were talking about at the local level being so different with the ballots and how you count. And that comes back to the cybersecurity. The cybersecurity is different. Protection mechanism is different depending on what systems are in place.
So Bill, I want to take it one further with that map, which was so illuminating to see, which is we should, and I know a number of cities and states are doing this, use electronic and tech methods to get people to vote on stuff besides just their elected representatives. So I've been working with different cities, like Pittsburgh is a great example. They have this program, you could look at it right now, called Bird's Eye View, which was set up as a way so that the residents of Pittsburgh would have a say in terms of how services are distributed and where they are, and see them through open data portals and be able to weigh in on the services that impact them on a daily basis. And we have the power to do that right now. So we don't have to do it every 4 years or 2 years or what have you. But as you were showing, Bill, the trend is moving towards more electronic voting. The trend should also be moving towards using technology so that we can have more input on government rather than just whenever there's an election cycle.
Yeah, thank you for that. And this seems like a really good time to raise one of the questions that's in the chat around the concept of electoral vote and how it's calculated and why is it different from the total vote count. And some of the things that you all have said have kind of danced around that and touched on that a bit, but does anyone want to speak directly to that? The concept of the electoral vote, how it's calculated, and why it's different from the total vote count.
Sure, I can say a little bit about that. So the Electoral College is calculated based on the number of congressional representatives that each state has. So that is all of the members. You know, there's one electoral vote for every House district that a state has, and 2 electoral votes for the 2 senators that each state has. So that, you know, that's why more populous states like California and Texas, New York, Florida have many more votes than, you know, small states, Delaware and Rhode Island, et cetera. This is a part of the Constitution. This was a compromise that the framers put together between big states and small states to try to give representation for smaller states, and also to sort of shield from a direct election. The debate wasn't actually between sort of direct election and electoral college. It was more kind of, should Congress appoint the president versus should there be this electoral college? And the direct election, they talked about it, but it wasn't ever really considered. And this was the same constitutional convention that also there was no direct election of senators, and the direct elections were limited initially. And so that's where the calculation comes in. And so that's why the state votes are so important. And the other part of that is that all but 2 states have what we call winner take all systems. So the candidate who wins the most votes in that state gets all the electoral votes from that state, except in 2 states, in Nebraska and Maine. And in those states, they divide it by congressional district. And so the candidate who wins the most in each congressional district gets that electoral vote. And then the winner of the state gets the 2 votes that are for the Senate. And we have had in recent elections some split. President Obama won one of the votes in Nebraska, I think one of the electoral votes in Nebraska in 2008. And I think Maine split last time as well. I'm forgetting I'm getting all my maps that I'm watching on TV and the maps from the past all confused. But it has happened in recent history that they have split in that way.
I need to take myself off mute before.
And I see some incredible speakers that have just joined us. It's so nice to see you, Mayor Perkins and Michael Hecht and Jeff Asher. Hello. we should get their voices in here.
Exactly.
Wow, that was elegant, Neil.
Yes.
Oh,
Put that cup down, Michael. We need to hear from you.
Oh, no, you don't. You don't want to hear that tonight.
So as everyone could tell, we're all one big happy family here. We have our other roundup of speakers who are joining us. So I will go ahead and introduce them. And our first group of speakers, I welcome you to stay in the conversation, chime in where you want to, and we'll just keep this moving right along. So for our next lineup of speakers, we have Jeff Asher, who's the co-founder of Data Linux, and he's also an adjunct instructor in Homeland Security Studies at the Tulane School of Professional Advancement. Thank you for joining us, Jeff. We also have Michael Hecht, who's the president and CEO of Greater New Orleans, Inc. Thank you so much for jumping in and joining us.
Hey, Dr. Great.
Michael, thank you so much. And last but not least, Mayor Adrian Perkins, City of Shreveport, and also candidate for U.S. Senate. So thank you for taking time out of what I'm sure is a busy night for you.
Kind of big.
So thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to jump right in with questions for you all. And like we did in the first round of conversation, feel free to jump in where you find that you want to add more insight. But I do have a few things that are prepared for you just as we continue on through the night. So Jeff, I'll start with you. Can you share with us your insights on polling data that we're seeing from this election? Polling data is always right, you're laughing. Because it's a huge question for us. So what factors should we be considering as it relates to accuracy and reliability with polling?
I hope Michael and Adrian get these difficult questions as well. It's hard to say, and I think that the key takeaway from tonight appears to be that polling is not entirely a science. There's an art to it. Clearly the polling was off in Florida, but it's obviously it's too early to tell what that means, especially in Miami-Dade County where a lot of Cuban Americans live. And if you follow Nate Cohn on Twitter for the New York Times statistician, he's talked about how difficult Florida is of a state to poll. And then conversely, you look at a lot of places in Florida where there weren't a lot of Latinos and non-whites. The suburbs, you're seeing this in Ohio where Biden is running significantly ahead of where Clinton was. And so you kind of are getting this duality where it's plausible, at least, that you would get a pro-Biden polling error in northern states, which are much more white. You don't have sort of the northern whites, and you get a more pro-Trump bounce in the southern states, which is interesting because it was much more uniform last time around. So it's 8:30. We don't even have results for Orleans Parish. It's really hard to say what anything means. Big picture, capital M. But it does look like it's plausible that you might see a pair of different polling errors in this election. And polling errors are natural. Polling is designed to tell us a general sense of where we're supposed to be. Everyone talks about last time the polling error, and nationally they had Clinton +4 before the election. She was plus 2.1 in terms of the popular vote. That's a normal miss. It was bigger with non-whites, especially in whites without a college degree, especially in the North. It's uncertain what it'll look like this time.
Thank you for that, Jeff. And that leads me to a question for Michael. Given what Jeff just shared, and then also what we've been experiencing recently with the pandemic, the impact on the economy, markets, economic development, that's your world. So what are you seeing regionally and also in cities across the nation?
From an economic development standpoint?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's been interesting because the truth is that if you had asked me 8 months ago where I thought we would be right now, I would actually have thought we would have been worse off than we are. And what we're seeing now, at least in New Orleans, and New Orleans was hit as hard as anywhere in the country because of the combination of tourism and hospitality, is that there's a small sector of businesses that have been just absolutely devastated. Any business that relies on congregation of people, particularly where people swap spit, they've been shut down. Then you've got a plurality of businesses that have managed through cutting costs and pivoting their business model, like restaurants that have shrunk their staff and moved to takeout, that are actually going to stay open and that they think they're going to make it. And there's a surprisingly large swath that's shown that kind of resilience. But then the question that remains within that is that all of those staff that were furloughed and laid off, what have they been doing now that the unemployment benefit ran out in August? And are they all working for Amazon right now? And I don't have a good answer for that question, but I think it's a very open question. Then you've got a surprising set of businesses that are quietly doing better than ever. And actually, if you go around the GNOing parishes, a lot of the parishes are even up for the year because people are spending money on everything from home furnishings to new cars. And so you're seeing a shifting of spending patterns. The markets have held up surprisingly. And so I'll end with this. After every crisis, there's real opportunity on the other side. And my biggest stress right now is that we're not focusing on those opportunities in Louisiana and strategizing and training our people to take advantage of the reshoring of technology and manufacturing, logistics opportunities and healthcare, because that's how we really come out of this crisis and take a tragedy and do something good with it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I certainly echo your thoughts and sentiments there. I think as I reflect on what this period has meant for me and what I've been looking at, is particularly in our public administration program, is where's the opportunity to grow? Where's the opportunity to learn from our experiences and recover and become more resilient ultimately. So I certainly agree with that, Michael. Thank you. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to shift gears a little bit for my question for you, Adrian, and it's around the presence of Black U.S. Senate candidates from the Deep South. I read an article today and had a discussion with a colleague about in this election, we have the most Black U.S. Senate candidates from the Deep South since Reconstruction. That's huge. What have been some of the challenges of frankly disrupting what's been a bit of a generational status quo by having such a major presence there?
Yeah, I'll say the challenges for African-American candidates in the Deep South has been one of fundraising and one of getting the typical political institutions to endorse Black candidates. It's been this rule in the past, you can call it a myth in the past, where the typical Democratic candidate for the South would look like someone who was not African American and someone who could get that moderate to white vote in the South. But we've seen people shatter that and win Democratic nominations to a historic number this year in African American candidates, beating extremely well-funded opponents that are within the Democratic Party, and really catching the people's voices and really catching the theme of the Democratic Party. So I think that's why we're seeing some breakouts from candidates this year that don't typically get those big endorsements from the Democratic institutions and haven't been able to fundraise to the number that their opponents have, is because they're really leading with a grassroots push. They're really leading people power campaigns. And I know we are, for my campaign, I'm very proud to say that we've raised just under $3 million, but that's over 70,000 contributions, bringing our average contribution to, a little over $30. That's, we have a bunch of grandmothers that have told, wrote letters and said, hey, spend this on a Coke and a hamburger. People are really, really giving what they have towards our campaign. And with, not much, we're being able to set records and really get in front of people and make these some extremely competitive races, competitive to a degree that we haven't seen in a long time from Democrats in the South. So I'm proud to be a part of this class, this groundbreaking class. And I think this is just a sign of things to come for us.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, given, as Michael brought up the opportunity, given what you shared, Adrian, and also your insights, Jeff, I pose this question to all of you. Looking at our next generation of civic leaders and public officials, what advice would you give to them about navigating hyperpartisan environments and polarized groups of people, bringing people together to take advantage of those opportunities, to work towards more diverse representation? What advice would you give to someone who is working and who looks to build a career in the civic sector on navigating some of the most difficult instances and situations that you all are working in? And I'll start with you, Jeff.
For me, it's to separate government from politics. Obviously, you have elections, but you also have someone that looks at data. It's important to be able to provide advice regardless of whether there's a D or an R at the end of the person's name. And that's really a lesson I learned working for the federal government with the CIA. When I do analysis, wherever it is, be it in the Times-Picayune, the New York Times, wherever it is that I'm writing, I find it important to be neutral and to look at data and to let the data draw to the conclusions. And so my advice, and that's a skill, you have to learn that. It's not something that in this hyper-partisan world, as you said, that comes naturally, I think, to a lot of people. So as someone that from the data perspective is often in the speak truth to power position, I think it's important to do that. And sometimes that means that the power isn't going to be happy with you. And that doesn't necessarily mean it might mean you've done a good job. Usually means you've done a good job. So I think that is the most important skill to learn, is to write and to speak and to present in a way where no matter what your personal feelings are, people respect your professional analyses.
Absolutely. Thank you. How about you, Michael? What are your thoughts?
Wait, what? Did Jeff work for the CIA? Wait, what?
We're looking for you.
You can't see me. This lesson, the lesson at GNO Inc. on this one, Halima, is very simple but very profound. And that is, when you have an issue that you're trying to push through, find the place where money and morality intersect. If you can find the place where money and morality come together, you can move mountains. And so some examples in Louisiana are criminal justice. By making both a moral and a mercenary, a financial argument on why we had to do criminal justice, we were able to get the Southern Poverty Law Center and Americans for Prosperity in the same room together, working together, which either means you're doing something important or it's the end of days. For coastal restoration, we frame coastal restoration not just as an environmental issue, but as one of trying to preserve our communities and to preserve our industry. And now that we're pushing wind as part of our energy portfolio, we're pushing it as something that's going to help employ our offshore marine industry. The fact that it's also a clean energy source is a benefit, but we're also leading with the financial, with the economic development side. And so I think when you can find those two things coming together, the money and the morality, you'll find that you can bring folks together and get things done.
Yeah. And I'm going to just piggyback on what Michael said a bit. When you talk about environmental issues, criminal justice reform, those issues that wouldn't on the surface, on the face of it, seem like they would get much of a push in Louisiana, you really have to have some courage, I would say, to begin with, because if you just take what it is on the face of it, you probably won't push it forward. You really have to have some courage to put those things forward. But when putting those things forward, you'll quickly find some common ground, especially when you are finding those things at the intersection of, you know, economic sustainability and environmental sustainability, or whatever your objective is. And I've seen that throughout the state on numerous fronts, but oftentimes it happens at that intersection. And I can say at the beginning of it, though, for those listening, at the beginning of it, it took some very courageous souls to put that forward and to make it a mission for themselves to put that forward, despite what the odds may have seemed like at the beginning. Those things didn't just come about. I worked on the governor's staff in 2016 when we talked about criminal justice reform, and there was a wave throughout the South of southern states, very Republican states, passing criminal justice reform bills. And there was an economic argument made on the economic sustainability of our tough on crime criminal justice system. And we watched that wave, and there was very courageous, great Louisiana citizens that said, it's our turn to pass a criminal justice reform bill to make us smart on crime. And then we had a very courageous governor that went out there and really co-opted that message and made it a key part of his initial platform to take him into the governor's mansion. So, you know, for everybody listening, I'd say, you know, there are a lot of tough issues that you really, really care about, but try to find a common ground and reaching across the aisle on, hey, how can I push this forward? And I think the path will open up in more instances than you would think. But I have to end there. I'm so sorry. This is such a great panel. I got to jump on a couple more Zoom calls tonight. Pleasure to be on a panel with everybody. And thank y'all so much for having me. Grateful for you.
Good luck, Mayor.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Good to see you. Jeff, you as well.
Good luck.
Michael, looked like you were about to chime in with something that Adrian was.
Well, yeah. So Adrian just said something that's really important, which I neglected to say. He reminded me. I want to underscore it. Is that you not only have to have the right strategy, but a lot of this is just perseverance. And so a great example of that is that early childhood just broke through as an issue over the last couple of years in Louisiana, as people realized that if you had $1 to spend, by far the most efficient place to spend it is the first 1,000 days of a kid's life. But it took, you know, at least a decade of individuals courageously pushing on that issue without any seeming success until finally, you know, kind of the issue hit a boil and the lid popped off. So perseverance is also, I think, an essential part of it.
Absolutely. Great, great insight. Thank you so much. Well, I really appreciate the time that you all have shared with us. For this segment, we're going to transition to get some insight from our viewers. So again, I want to thank you for sharing your perspective and your insight. And I hope that you're able to get some rest this evening. Yeah, Michael, you look like you are up, and Adam, you're not going to sleep anytime.
Right, get them.
All right. Well, you guys have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. So we are going to continue on with our evening as I pull up a bit of a poll here. I want to hear from our audience how you're doing, how you're faring, and how things are going. So if you give me a moment, I will open my screen share. Mentimeter. So we have a poll here, and you can go to menti.com and use the code that's 6801296. The question is here, In 3 words, describe your voting experience for the 2020 election. And that should come up. I should be able to see everyone's feedback, everyone's thoughts. This is an anonymous poll that you can participate in and give your insights. If you are typing things in Mentimeter, okay, great. We're starting to see some feedback. It was easy. That's great. Stressful. Yes, stressful for many. I'm glad that you all persevered. You're hopeful. You voted by mail. Yes. So, I love to have this dialogue. And as people chime in, you get to see the range of experiences. Some of those things were captured certainly by the insight that Bill and Celeste and Neil shared earlier, and also that Jeff, Michael, and Adrian chimed in with as well. So we are all experiencing a lot within our voting experiences at a baseline, but certainly the election season, given the pandemic, and it's captured all of these things, community oriented, fun. I'm glad to see those things, fingers crossed. Yeah, so we can certainly relate to all that we are seeing. So as we transition to the next part of our conversation, and I think everyone is finished chiming in here. It looks like it because things are slowing down. Our responses are slowing down. We're going to continue right on ahead with our next slide. All right. So as we go into the next segment, I want to take a moment and pause. And we have very stressful stuck here on the screen for some reason. Technology is not always our friend, but we do the best we can with it. I want to take a moment to share with you some information about the public administration program. As a host of this event, our public administration program provides graduate level education that focuses on preparing civic sector leaders and professionals who can successfully navigate the complexities of what we see today. And some of those things we talked about. And we, at our base, at our core, have a commitment to equity, ethics, and responsiveness to contemporary issues. So if you want to learn more about our program, I invite you to visit our website. This slide shows and shares with you some of the things that we offer in the program, our concentrations and our graduate certificates that certainly speak to contemporary issues and all that we're seeing today. Also gives you a framework of the course loads and the courses that you'll be taking in the program. So I welcome you as you continue to think about your own career and your own growth in public administration. Please consider our Master of Public Administration program. It's fully online. So for those of you who are not in New Orleans, you can still take advantage of it and join us. And again, you can learn more by visiting our website, and that's there at the bottom of the page, sopa.tulane.edu. So with that, I am going to hand it off to my co-moderator, Suri Duitch. So Suri, you can take it away.
Great, thanks so much, Halima. And that was kind of weird when very stressful stayed on your screen. Like, I don't know, you read anything into it.
Exactly.
All right, you should take a break. So that first hour went really, really fast. I think that might happen with the next period too. So I'm really excited to welcome our next panel. We have Sharon Courtney, who is the Vice President for Government Relations at Tulane, and who is also a a civic leader in many ways in New Orleans for a long time, and a great bipartisan negotiator. And so we're excited to have Sharon with us. We're also joined by Carrie Stockwell, who is an advisor to Mike Fitz, the president of Tulane, but has a very interesting background as a congressional staffer to Speaker John Boehner of the U.S. House of Representatives and Senator David Vitter from Louisiana. So we're excited to have them. And I think we'll be joined in a few more minutes by another panelist, Stephen Sigmund. But actually, so I'm going to go ahead and I don't know, maybe this might be shocking for people, but I was going to go ahead and take a look at the returns, if you guys are okay with that. Sharon's like, no, don't. Well, I'm very interested to hear what Stephen has to say about this, but it's definitely looking like the country's still pretty split, and we're not seeing a big blue wave, we're not seeing a big red wave, and it's not at the moment feeling like there's going to be a lot of definitive things going on, at least with the presidential race tonight. Although we are, we're seeing activity with the state level races. So let's see, Sharon, what are your thoughts about how the election's going so far? What's coming back?
There. Okay. Thanks. Can you hear me now? Yeah. I mean, I think just what you said. I mean, we're sort of seeing status quo right now from 4 years ago. I think and we flipped one Senate seat so far that's confirmed. And that's in Colorado, which is probably the least surprising of the Senate seats to flip. So there's a lot left to be written. I think there's probably a lot of disappointment about Georgia and North Carolina right now, particularly North Carolina, where that was really going to be sort of the new Democratic coalition coming together. So losing North Carolina is kind of a blow. So for the Democratic hopes anyway. But there's a lot more left to go. Particularly the Midwest is going to tell the tale as usual.
Right. So I'm going to turn to Carrie, and so I was joking with Carrie yesterday that she was our one panelist with serious Republican credentials, and in a pretty heavily Democratic leaning lineup. And so just in general, Carrie, what are you thinking so far about what you're seeing tonight? Is it what you expected? I find your background as a Republican congressional staffer really fascinating, and I don't know. Let's see. And I'm also wondering, how are you feeling about the Republican Party at the moment?
Well, on the election results side of things, I've been watching, and I think I sort of mentally prepared myself for this earlier in the day. I think it's early. I'm curious how early votes have been tabulated yet, and whether that will be coming in later tonight. I think it's really early. As far as my background in Republican politics, I think especially when I got to work for the Speaker of the House, I feel like I saw the best of Washington in some ways, and sort of at the leadership levels, how people can come together, seeing how institutions work. And I just have this really broad respect for our government as an institution. I did have a personally conscious uncoupling with the Republican Party several years ago, about 2016. So this is a difficult night for a lot of people. And I just hope that, as the night goes on, that everyone out there can, disagree without being disagreeable, that we can just kind of move on and, move forward.
Okay. Thanks, Carrie. And welcome to Stephen Sigmund. I'm going to introduce you real quickly. So, so you are with Global Strategy Group, which is, and you're based in New York.
Well, theoretically, I've been based at Maplewood, New Jersey in my home for about the last 9 months.
Okay, right. So New York area, and you are the founding executive director of the Global Gateway Alliance, and you are an advisor to many different kinds of organizations and institutions and politicians. And we're really glad to have you. You have strong connections to down here.
Yeah,
in New Orleans.
I'm an ANS alum from 1992.
Excellent.
Both my grandparents are Tulane alums. My wife and I were married in New Orleans. Our youngest child is named Nola, so we're
wonderful. Well, it's really nice to have you. So Sharon and Carrie were just reflecting a little bit on what we're seeing from the election so far tonight, and we were commenting that it's, there's nothing hugely definitive going on. I mean, certainly we're seeing, like Sharon was saying and Carrie, we're seeing some disappointments in some of the races where there seemed to be Democratic momentum. And so far that's not happening. And the presidential race is feeling like it's gonna drag on for a bit, most likely. And I'm just curious if you have any initial impressions about what's going on so far tonight that you want to share.
Yeah, again, I'd agree that it's hard to form a lot of solid impressions given the, given that it's not totally clear where all the numbers are coming from. The one thing I would say is, unfortunately for those of us who were, who want Joe Biden to be president, the enthusiasm gap seems to be there again, same way it was in 2016, where so many rural voters are turning out and really pushing enthusiastically day of for President Trump, and that's making the numbers it seems to be giving him Florida probably, and making the numbers now very, very close, and North Carolina and Ohio and Pennsylvania and we'll see in other places.
So how do you connect this, or can you connect this with this incredible upswing of early voting that we saw across the country, and what seemed, at least anecdotally, to be populations of young people coming out to vote who might not have otherwise, or and just the sheer numbers and the sense amongst so many that this is the election of our lifetimes and we need to get out. And like, how do you square that sense with what we're seeing so far tonight?
Yeah, look, I do think you will see record turnout tonight. I mean, I think that's that's a very positive thing for the country as a whole, and you'll see record turnout in places where Democrats are favored and in places where Republicans are favored. I mean, that's sort of the bottom line here, is that you basically, much like you've had over the last 4 years, you have a country that's very divided. I mean, you have a country that's very divided between urban, suburban, and rural, and it just seems like you still have, in a lot of places, when you have an electoral college system, in a lot of places where the rural vote really counts a lot, it still favors an incumbent president. Remember, we've had an incumbent president has only lost twice in the century, and or 3 times in the century, sorry, and so they're hard to beat. I mean, they have the powers of incumbency.
Right. So the power of incumbency and the structure of the electoral college, and something that we teach about in the MPA program at Tulane is the sort of historical and structural bias in American government against urban areas and against high population areas in favor of the Jeffersonian gentleman farmer kind of idea. And that seems to very much still be around, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'd go further than calling it gentleman farmer. I mean, it dates back to slavery. I mean, like so much else in this country, that the 3/5 voter of, the slaves were 3/5 of a human, and they weren't, but they wouldn't have been any of a human to be able to vote. So the South was able to keep its power by establishing the Electoral College. I mean, it's obviously an anachronism, but look, I think I don't want to be too negative here. I mean, this is, we're still very, very early here. There's lots still to go on, and we really don't know the outcome in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, North Carolina, Arizona. Biden is winning in places he's supposed to be winning, and Colorado, New Hampshire, New Mexico, et cetera. So it's going to be very close, but closer than a lot of us. Or certainly than the polling anticipated, just as happened 4 years ago, right? Which is sort of back to my original point, which is that enthusiasm really matters and it really counts. I mean, that was very clear with Barack Obama, and it's been very clear with Donald Trump. It's just that the enthusiasm is is in very different places.
Right. Well, so I want to go back to Sharon, and you're in your daily life, you are. You're really good at working both sides of the aisle. You build relationships over decades, and you have a great track record. And so I'm just curious, what do you have to say about the future of bipartisanship in this country? Not knowing the outcome of the presidential election tonight, but sort of seeing how things are playing out so far. You're still on mute. Let's see. All right, there you go, Sharon.
Okay. What I was going to say was really brilliant, and now you just have to put up with what's coming now. I would say that, so let's say that the president wins re-election, and we pick up some seats in the House. We don't win the Senate, and that Democrats don't win the Senate. Then I would say you probably pretty much have the stalemate that you've had today. You're going to have an emboldened House because they're going to have more members, but they're not going to be able to get anything done. If the Democrats take the Senate but lose the White House, then it's going to be, I think, honestly, you might actually see the president work with them on things like infrastructure. And I mean, I'm less enthusiastic about him working with Congress on immigration reform, but maybe. I think you might see the Donald Trump that we had sort of potentially expected when he was elected the first time, that he would actually be this deal maker, which he's going to have to be if he wins re-election and the Democrats take the Senate. But if it stays status quo, then I think we're just right where we are today, that really very little gets done.
Right. All right. So then going back to Carrie, I was a little bit bemoaning I think probably many people are bemoaning the inability to identify a center of sort of moral, ethical conservatism in this country, and people who, whether they are socially conservative or economically conservative or whatever the case might be, have a real ideology, but also a sense of the greater good. And I'm just wondering if you have thoughts about whether it's the Republican Party or, I don't know, some future iteration of conservatism. What do you think is going to happen if, let's say, we assume that Donald Trump continues to have sort of a stranglehold on the Republican Party?
I think there's a lot of people out there, and I count myself in that group, who don't really feel like they have a home right now ideologically. And I think there's a lot of room, whether that's in the Democratic Party or if something else were to form, I have no idea. But I think there's a lot of space there. And I think just structurally, there's so much work that has to be done in the country. It's like the renovation of an old house, you know, it was beautiful when it was built. And some people still think it's beautiful, especially if they only stay in like 1 or 2 rooms. But, you know, you look closely, there's cracks in the foundation, there's, you know, shingles missing from the roof. It's a mess. And I think more and more people are realizing that there needs to be real structural change, and they're looking for the best way to do that. And I think it's just a matter of a lot of people trying to find that place, you know, policy wise, that is, you know, compassionate, equitable, you know, something that can actually move our country forward.
And are you starting to, I mean, do you think this conversation is starting to happen? Is it like a think tank kind of thing? Is it a potential third party, or do you think is it too nascent? It's not really getting organized yet?
I don't think there's anything really organized yet in this sense. I'm really curious to see what happens if there, you know, if tomorrow, say Joe Biden, you know, wins, and we know that in the next week or so. I'm really curious to see what, you know, members of Congress who have supported Trump, what, you know, exactly what people start to do. We'll see.
Okay. Well, I want to go ahead and do another poll.
Hey, Suri,
yeah.
Can I ask a question? I know I'm not supposed to ask questions, but I am curious. And that maybe Stephen might have some insights on this. I've been sort of a little fascinated tonight by the Latino support, Hispanic support for Trump.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if anybody has any insights on that. I mean, I know it's generally a more socially conservative demographic, but he's getting less of the vote than Hillary Clinton did in 2016.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple things. One, you know, immigration wasn't as much of an issue, even though obviously the Latino vote is not a monolith, but, you know, there was a lot of kind of insulting language in 2016 around Latinos that didn't really happen this time in 2020. I think that seemed to have been a choice by the Trump campaign. And then secondly, you know, there are lots of parts of the Latino community that are more socially conservative, but also sort of the entrepreneurial sense, right? The sense of, you know, businessman, entrepreneurial, more kind of less about, you know, government intervention, et cetera, particularly for male voters. So I think, yeah, cutting into some of those numbers seems to be making a difference. I mean, it made the biggest difference, obviously, in Florida. You know, some of that is that again, the Latino voters aren't a monolith. I mean, there are a lot of Cubans and Venezuelan Americans in Miami-Dade, but, you know, that's a pretty big drop off from whatever it was, 30% to, you know, 14 or 15%. That cut it in half. So that's very significant.
And I want to encourage our audience also just to remember that people can ask questions in the chat at any point in the conversation too. So I am working on bringing up a poll. Sorry. Actually, you know what? I'm going to ask. So I'm going to bring back Halima and ask her to share. But I see a question. So I see a question from Natalia about Red Scares and communists. And do you think that's still an effective tactic, I guess? And we'll ask that of Stephen, and then we'll go and do the poll.
Well, I don't think it was so much presented as communist or Red Scares. It's more, you know, this notion of Democrats as socialists, but I think socialist was a proxy for, you know, government run everything, right? That you don't get to run your own life, that the government tells you how to run your life. And I don't know that had a very big impact, except to kind of reinforce the pre-existing notions that people already had, right? I mean, if you look at what's happening with the actual vote count right now, you know, what we're really seeing is that, you know, it's a kind of doubling down on the divide, right? And it may have worked for Donald Trump, it may not have, but it's clearly a doubling down on the divide, right? And so part of the socialism argument was an argument to drive up enthusiasm and turnout in rural areas and among older people, and that it seems to have happened. So I don't think it was so much about a red scare, but more we told you so, and stick with us, and it's it's the only way to go.
So here's a question for all three of you, actually. How are we going to transcend this moment of incredible hyper partisanship? I mean, I guess it was before you got on, Stephen, a little bit. Halima asked this question of the last panel of, what's the way forward for the next generation of civic leaders? And so as a general question, how do you see this country moving beyond the hyperpartisanship that we're so stuck in at the moment?
I'll let someone else answer that. Good luck.
I think what's interesting is that we live in this age of like hyper connectivity. Somebody who lives in a small town in South Dakota could easily have a civil conversation with, someone in Manhattan, and that's not happening. The way we're siloed into these information channels online, it's not going to happen in the comment section of one of these news sites. But I don't know, like, how do we create that space where that can happen? I think that's one of the things I love about working on a university campus, is that you get people from all over and, all sorts of backgrounds, and, you put them in a classroom or in a department, and you get to interact and hear people's points of view. And I wish more people had that opportunity on a daily basis.
The only thing I'd say is just, and I think this is because I have teenage children who are, pretty civically active and involved. I mean, I will say that generation, even though they are obviously growing up in a period when it's very hyper partisan, and they are living in bubbles as well. But they're very good at, they're much better than we are at understanding how to use technology to have conversations. Is a willingness to listen, even if they have very strong points of view. I mean, I think a lot of us at a certain, of a certain age, social media, it's kind of has overwhelmed us a little bit, right? So that you really don't know how to, as Kara just said, have a civil or civic conversation on it, and so. There's fewer and fewer places where you're able to do that. So my hope is that whether it's a Biden administration or a second Trump administration, it will not be Donald Trump for much longer. As that ends, the fever starts to pass a little bit in the United States. That generation grows up and starts to take leadership positions and hopefully can kind of remake the sense of compromise that you need to actually get something done.
Right. Well, I think that's a really hopeful point. Yeah, go ahead, Sharon.
I was just, mine's less hopeful, so maybe we should end on Stephen. I was just going to say, I think that in a lot of ways, we've gotten what we asked for. We districted ourselves, both Democrats and Republicans, into districts where you do not have to compete, where you're living, every member is in an echo chamber. And every time the Democrats or the Republicans take the House, the only people who lose typically are the moderates or more moderate people in both parties. And so it's just becoming increasingly polarized. I don't know what the answer to that is. I do think that leaders have to start to stand up for what's right, but I almost laugh when I say that out loud, because it's just, I haven't seen any evidence of that anyone is prepared to do that.
Yeah, it seems to be rolling the other way, as you suggest, right? Which is, in fact, not only do you not have any need to go outside your bubble, in fact, you have to reinforce the bubble, right? To keep your seat, right? You have to be more hyper partisan, right? I remember somebody saying, like, the worst thing you can do now in Washington is be seen eating lunch with somebody from one of your as a congressman, is be seen from someone from the other side, which is just there's an absurdity to that. My grandparents were in Congress, actually from New Orleans. They represented New Orleans for 50 years between the two of them, and it was very, very common for them to have members from the other side of the aisle at their house or at their schools, and part of it is that they, people actually lived in Washington when they were serving, right? Because they had to. You didn't have this kind of jet travel where you could get back and forth every 3 days. But that, it's a lot harder to punch somebody in the face at work when you're, when your kids are on the same baseball field.
I mean, I've officially reached the point where the 90s are the good old days. When I worked on the Hill. And I mean, I thought it was becoming super partisan then because Newt Gingrich was really making his play at that point. Yeah. But I worked for a senior member of appropriations, and, they got the one thing done that I think Congress needs to get done every year, which is they had appropriations done in regular order every time. And now it doesn't ever get done.
Yeah.
So, okay. So here's a question. So, Biden very much has a path to victory, whether it's over the next several weeks or however long it takes. And so, what would you, what do you think he should do to try to reestablish some of that culture of comedy and bipartisanship in Washington, even knowing that there's some things circumstantially working against it, like the jetting back and forth? What would you say to him?
Look, I think he's a person who by nature would be making an effort to do that. And certainly I think the fever would have to die down first, like literally and figuratively, and COVID. But I think, as everybody said tonight, I think it's going to be very hard in the immediate future, given the way the Congress is structured. I think he'll be able to make a deal or two, maybe again on infrastructure or on COVID package. But in general, the effort for the next 2 years, if indeed Biden wins, is to take back the Republicans will be trying to take back the House and beat him politically over the head for the next couple of years, and that would certainly be true if Trump wins re-election as well. So, I mean, I don't know that I don't see a path in the next coming period of time that we somehow develop more bipartisanship, even though it would be very nice if we did. I think you're going to need a kind of generational change in leadership and in the power structure. I mean, you have a power structure that is all in their late 70s, so it can't go on forever, right? And I think that's what it'll take really to make any kind of change there.
Right. Well, I'm seeing some comments in the chat that I want to take us on a more uplifting route, right? Because this is, I think that this conversation is realistic, but it's also
depressing. Sorry.
It is a little depressing, but I also think that, I want to hold on to this point about generational change. And so actually to go back a little bit to our earlier question from this evening, what's your recommendation to someone who's studying public administration right now? And we have this amazing generation of next civic leaders, and they want to do good in the world. And what would you say to them about being in the public sector or supporting the public sector, and how to do their work well?
My first piece of advice would be to apply for Tulane's MPA program and to take your class. I've had this thought so many times this whole semester, I wish I had this, 10 years ago, especially when I was working on the Hill. But I think just having, more foundational knowledge and having those places like the classroom where you can have those exchanges, and then maybe you take that into your professions as well. If you go to work in government, you know how to engage and you know how to, the basis of good policy.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I also, of course, encourage taking the Tulane program, but just more broadly, for younger people to be involved and stay involved, not just civically and volunteering, et cetera, but really in their careers. One even though we have, I think all three of us have been in a hyper-partisan period, I think without even asking or knowing Carrie or Sharon, I'm sure they would say, it is tremendously rewarding to work on public issues and public policy. And, I've done both sides. I've done the private sector and I've done, public issues, and, public issues are just significantly more rewarding because you're working every day to try to get something done for a broader populace, and you feel good about the fact that you're trying to contribute something, and I think that's real. And I think, and I still hold on to that, and I'm 51 years old. I think it's certainly true, would certainly be true of people in their teens and 20s who are just coming up now. And there's a lot, and even in the hyperpartisanship, there are tons and tons of opportunities to make a difference in areas that aren't, yes, direct elected politics, but also, in government, in public, in policy issues, in issue campaigns, and all sorts of things, in all sorts of ways that a program like yours can prepare people for. And I would say that's the hope and need of the generation behind us, very much so, particularly as the generation above us starts to shuffle off this mortal coil, as it were.
Right. Thanks. Okay. Yeah. And I think, I wonder if anyone has any final thoughts about social media and the echo chamber. And, Stephen made a comment about his kids being able to navigate it maybe a little bit better than like our generation, Stephen's and mine and Sharon's. Yeah. Do you guys have any thoughts about social media and its place in this?
That it would be good if it went away. So that's not going to happen. I'm hoping that Carrie or Stephen have a better answer than I do for this, because I don't see, it's one of those things that you've opened Pandora's box, and it's not clear to me where we go from here. So you have both Facebook and Twitter, trying to monitor what's happening, but there's pushback on that side. And then in the reality, can they really monitor it? And I just, I don't know what the next step is for that. And that is a terrible answer. I'm so sorry, Suri.
No, it's perfectly fine. This is the pragmatist part of the panel for the evening. So Carrie, as a current civic leader and also a future civic leader, do you have any final thoughts about this and the next generation and what people should be doing to reinvigorate and build coalitions and all that?
Well, I think Stephen's right. I think the next generation really does have, decorum's not the right word, but they just seem to know how to engage better on the medium of social media. So I hope that has something to do with it. I hope maybe that, drives kind of the platforms to rethink how they structure their algorithms. And that's a whole other topic, but.
I actually think decorum is the right word. And I think they it was sort of part of my point, which is I think they, at least look, from what I see, I'm in a limited universe of young people, just the kids around, my younger cousins and my own children, et cetera. They are much better at they're much better at using social media as a proxy for their actual conversations and their actual engagement. And we've all used it as a kind of, almost a hiding place or like a way to shade ourselves behind it, right? And so, that carries dangers with it as well, but I just think they're better at it than we've ever been, and I hope that continues.
Right. So I'm going to actually finish with a question on a different topic. So ranked choice voting, and is that an opportunity for the future? And is it something that people should be supportive of? Any thoughts about this one?
I mean, I'll go just because I've worked on 2 mayoral campaigns in New York, and New York next year in its mayoral campaign is for the first time doing ranked choice voting. I don't know. I don't really know enough about it to say whether it's the future or not, but it'll be interesting to see that as a laboratory. I mean, I do know that in the experiences that I've had working in those two campaigns, you know, it was structured in a way that you if nobody got to 40%, you would have a runoff and a primary, and so, you know, it was very much about building a base and only navigating towards a base. And I think you'll see in New York next year, you know, a much more kind of broader effort to build coalitions, because you need to be everybody's second choice, right? So I think that does lend itself to less negative campaigning, and more importantly, less just sort of, you know, barrel towards the base and double and triple down on them the way that you're seeing tonight at the presidential level.
Right. All right. I'm going to thank all three of you and finish up. And I'm actually going to ask Halima to go ahead and share the poll for our audience. Thanks so much for your time, all three of you. And we look forward to hearing from you again in the future. We have this poll up about the election night return so far. If folks want to go to menti.com and answer the poll again, the code for putting it in once you go is at the top of the screen. So we'll give it a minute to see if
we should be doing a therapy session.
I know, right? Okay. I like that too early.
I would caution, just seeing all this, it is still too early. I mean,
yeah.
You know, you have Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona. I don't know what's happening in North Carolina and Ohio, but all of those are still completely out there, and you have no idea what's happening in them. So just, you know, I know it's hard, and I know I would feel nauseous, anxiety as well, but you know, there's a long way to go. So just hold tight.
Right. All right. And on that note, we're going to stop sharing the poll and take a minute and get ready for our next group of panelists. Yeah, I think we're going to change the trajectory of this conversation. Thanks, Sharon.
Okay.
Terry,
Thank you so much
for your time. Really
all right, appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Suri. Hey, Flozell, it's good to see you.
Sharon.
Welcome, Flozell, and it's really nice to see you. And we've got Ashley, great, and I think we have former Mayor Grinnell coming up as well.
I think we're ready to take the challenge, though, to turn the conversation around.
Exactly.
Somebody's got you.
So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you guys just real quickly, and then I am actually really excited to hear what you have to say. So this is our last group of speakers for the evening. All of them civic leaders of various sorts. So Flozell Daniels, who runs the Foundation for Louisiana and is active in the Urban League and with the Regional Transit Authority in New Orleans, where he's done really interesting work. Ashley, who has a background in the civic sector in New Orleans and is now doing national work with the All In Cities Initiative and Policy Link, and Daryl Grinnell, who is the former mayor of Natchez, Mississippi, and is also an educator, including, and we actually, I don't know, we don't see your video on. I don't know if we can get your video on, but are you there?
I'm here.
Excellent. All right, great. So we just had a little bit of a conversation with the last panel, and then I don't know if you saw the poll, but we're at a point in the evening where people are feeling, discouraged and anxious about the direction of the federal election. And at the same time, there's incredible excitement about mobilization and get out the vote movements. And so what do you all have to say about that and the direction things are going, especially, well, in particular with racial equity, but not only? Anyone, please go ahead.
Ashley, go first.
Sure. First of all, thank you guys for having us tonight and for this conversation. And I think I want to first honor my colleague, Flozell Daniels. He has many hats, but one hat is the chair of the Regional Transit Authority. And they decided that today, right, fares should be free so that folks would not have an impediment to the polls. And I think that's part of what I want to elevate for folks tonight. First, I work for a national policy organization called Policy Link. Every day in our work, we really center what we do around the 100 million people in America who are living at or near poverty. So a third of America who is living at or near poverty. And I'm raising that for a couple reasons. One is that so far in the returns, it seems, we keep talking about how polarized we still are. And for us, the reason that we're centering the 100 million is because it is a diverse group of Americans across sector of America who are all struggling. And I think part of what today affirms for me is the work that we still have to do to help to help folks see each other and to see that we really are connected, and our futures are connected and tied to each other. And if we can start to build coalition across the diversity of folks who are struggling with the same issues, right? The economy and infrastructure, whether it's transportation or clean water or housing, we've got to build that coalition in order to get the work done. And so one thing I think is for us to start to really understand the nexus of those issues. And then the other thing I would say, and Carrie spoke to it in the last conversation, I hope that seeing the stalemate also helps us to understand the level of structural change that's going to be required to do this work. We actually shouldn't be surprised about this moment and how we got here. There's been this cutting away, right, around democracy and even, quite frankly, who gets to participate in the economy. And I think why I remain hopeful, no matter what happens here, is that this moment, COVID, the economic downturn, the protests for racial justice, all is still activation. It is a moment that calls us to purpose, not just on November 3rd, but for the years to come. And then I will shut up. But the last thing I want to say is that our president and CEO tweeted today, we decided not to wait till tomorrow to send a message to the nation. And he said, to truly realize the promise of equity, we must look beyond election results. We've got to be bold and courageous to remake the very nature of our government, to do the thing our government has never done. And that is to become anti-racist, right? Because that's the thing that's going to unlock really access, opportunity, power for that 100 million. So I'll just start there.
Yes. I think Ashley's hit it on the head. Thank you, my beloved sister and colleague. At the Foundation for Louisiana, we think a lot about generational work and this idea that, and some of the folks earlier talked about, this idea that we're suddenly split and partisan in such a divided country. And how do we get back to, there's not much evidence in history that we've actually ever been with each other as much as we like to wish we were. What there is evidence, though, is that people have come together over the course of America's history to create a more perfect union, to really push for these ideals that Ashley talked about. And that's what's been exciting for us in a community like New Orleans and Louisiana, where we're 15 years after Katrina. One of the things that people discussed, even in that moment, when we were at our lowest, when we were at our worst, we said, we're going to come together and we're going to fight the good fight. And people are going to really think about what does it mean to create generational change. And so there is excitement, not only in the national landscape where you see people organizing and creating coalitions, not only in their own communities, but talking to their colleagues and peers in other parts of the country. You also see a sort of resurgence of leadership in local communities. If you look at New Orleans, for instance, one of the things that's been most exciting, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, is this idea that some of the criminal justice reform efforts that we've made in the past few years, some, by the way, leading, New Orleans has led the country in decarceration and things of that nature. Now we're turning our attention to the work of the district attorney, the incredibly important work of the judicial bench and other offices where we're sending people to represent us. And we not only get to look at what's happening with Biden and Trump and what's happening with the senatorial races, clearly those are critically important issues, and we should talk about those. I'm also hoping that we get a chance to check in about some of these hyperlocal races, what it means to see the kind of energy that people are bringing to these races, how important Louisiana, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Shreveport, and other places have been in leading a national conversation about reform and about doing something, doing what Ashley just said, this idea that we get to be anti-racist and we get to uncouple and unwind the very making of this country. Some folk talked about it earlier, but this idea that the Electoral College was created to undermine opportunity for all of us. And so that we're having this conversation, of course we're having this conversation, because it was always intended to undermine what we understand to be democracy. We now see political actors using the legal system and misusing and abusing political systems to undermine people's access to vote. If part of the discussion tonight and over the next few weeks must not only be who decided to vote or not, it also has to be who stole their votes. It also has to be what actions were taken through redistricting, what actions were taken with regard to the maintenance of the Electoral College, what actions were taken to sue communities, to actually sue and use the legal system. We can have a discussion about how important the legal system is to the political science community, so that we can undermine people's right to vote. These are not new tactics, but we have to address them if, in fact, America is going to be what it can be going forward.
This is really good perspective. And I'm wondering, Mayor Grinnell, what's your reflection based on your own experience in Natchez and otherwise? Let's see, we want to get you off mute.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay, there you go.
All right, you can hear me? Okay, let's give me 1 second.
All right.
Technical difficulties.
Sorry. Okay. Well, why don't we come back to you? I think it's really interesting to sort of, in a way, we're ending the evening with this conversation about, with sort of, your points about this is actually not so different, right? And the idea about the next generation, the idea about local races and how important those are. And let's see, are you ready for us, Mayor Grinnell?
I think so.
Awesome.
There's no echo. Thanks for having me this evening. And yeah, I served as mayor of the oldest city on the Mississippi River, Natchez. And Natchez is a city that's, it's a 50-50 city in respect to ethnicity. And here I was back in 2015 running for office, and I won by 93% of the vote of a 50-50 community. And I ran on a platform where it was not about black, it was not about white, it was about green. Working on enhancing the economy of Natchez. on a platform of unity, of bringing people together. And that has been my mission. I was in public office for a total of 22 years. I served on the Adams County Board of Supervisors, which I think here in Louisiana, we refer to them as county commissioners, where I was president of the board. And, we worked on bringing about unity in our community. And so that was my whole mission in terms of just working together and from a grassroots effort, young and old, rich and poor, bringing people in order. Because when, and it's always been my philosophy, when when you enhance the community, it has a domino effect. It will have a positive impact on everyone. And we have to spread a positive message. We've heard a lot of negativity and division over the past several years across the country. And it's important, if we're going to work towards that more perfect union, that we've got to spread a positive message in terms of unifying people, because what benefits one side will have a domino effect to help all others.
So if it's okay, there's a question in the chat that I'd like to pose to all of you. It's what recourse is there when even the very act of facilitating access to the polls is perceived as politically partisan? How do we respond to that?
One of the things I've been thinking a lot about, Suri, is this idea of the narrative, the political narrative, and what's true and what's not true. And so this idea that even facilitating access to the polls, which is such a middle of the road, should be, right? A very simple, easy thing, as the mayor said, for all people to get on the same page, it should be really easy. But this narrative, this partisan, hyper-partisan narrative about anything you do that helps the other side get access to democracy and to the vote and to power is partisan, is a very intentional narrative. I think it's really important for us to study this communication strategy in history, both recent history as well as further back. It's not unheard of for the opposition, particularly for conservative status quo parties, the landed gentry and the like, to use these narratives to basically suggest anything that's going to open the vote and democracy and power to women, to Black and brown people, and over the course of history, now even discussions about why don't we automatically register people to vote? Why don't we do more same-day voter registration, as happens in some states but not nationally? Those discussions, I think, are really intentional, and they're meant for status quo, I would say, parties and politicians to stay in power. And our electorate and our residents and citizens really have to be paying attention to those narratives and how they impact their decisions. And I would even argue that the media has a really important role in educating the public. It's been disappointing to not see more activism, maybe that's not the right word, but more journalism from the media to talk about how false narratives change behavior and how important it is for the public to be aware of those things.
I would also say, I think that we really need to get comfortable with the tension and really learn how to hold this tension. I'm still thinking about the screen, the last survey that you did, and just how folks are feeling right now. Like I want us to be okay with the space that we're in as a nation. The reason I say about holding this tension is because even for the folks who, already want to grieve about the outcome of a federal election tonight, the summer of 2020 and quite frankly, the community response to the murder of George Floyd also demonstrated that power doesn't just exist in one place, right? And quite frankly, it doesn't just exist in government, right? So there's a part of what we're doing tonight, which is focused on elected seats. That's what this moment is about. But we've had several months of watching kind of regular folks make a demand around justice and equity, right? And not just that it's a demand. I think why I say be comfortable with the tension is because we're experiencing that as a bad thing. And we're not able to appreciate the number of people who voted today for whom racial equity was their top issue, right? That's creating a demand. And so building coalitions is important, and staying connected and feeling unified is important, but the tension is okay too, right? Because it's that part of that is the bridge that gets us to doing the tough work that we wouldn't do otherwise.
I think that's powerful. Ashley, if I could add to your point, and they did all of that in the context of a pandemic where we first were told we couldn't do any of this. You can't go out and vote. You can't be out in the public. And then we learned information and we learned how to protect ourselves. And you're going to have historic voting numbers, even in the middle of a pandemic, which, to your point, really is an exciting sign that people want to participate in this democracy and bring forth critical issues like racial and economic equity as priorities.
I tell you, I was really impressed in the city of Natchez last election. I decided not to run for another election because I wanted to start a new career and make a change because I had been in public office for 22 years. But I saw the citizens of Natchez during the last city election come out in record numbers to participate in the voting process. And as Flozell said, in the midst of a pandemic. And we had put all the safeguards in place and made recommendations to the citizens, in terms of using proper aseptic practices when they went to the polls, sanitize your hands, social distancing. And I tell you, I was really impressed. And with this presidential election that's going on, to see the numbers of individuals, of course, I've established my residency here in New Orleans, and I went several weeks ago down to the old courthouse in Algiers to vote. And I was just really impressed with the lines and the numbers of people participating in that process. And it made me really proud because I thought about many of my ancestors and our ancestors who struggled in order for us to have the right to vote. And my dad, who now is ill, he was a part of that civil rights movement. He was one of the ones who transported John Lewis when they came down to Mississippi as freedom fighters. So I was just really proud. One of the things that I did as mayor of the city of Natchez is that I erected the first civil rights monument in the history of the city to commemorate those great individuals who made those sacrifices for us to have an opportunity today to participate in the process that took place today.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mayor, could I jump on that bandwagon? One, to thank you for your service. I think one of the unheralded stories of tonight in this larger conversation is how many people have stepped up to offer themselves for public service, right? The mayor has a distinguished career for more than 2 decades. You have others who had no experience with government, who decided because their country and because their community needed them. Dozens and dozens of folks, at least here in Louisiana, who we thought would never run for office. I think Ashley and I looked at some of the names initially and said, oh God, they're running for office. Because as the mayor will tell you, it's very difficult work, right? For any of the students and other folks who are thinking about it, both Ashley and I have worked for mayors. It is unforgiving work. It's endless work. You don't get days off. And it's an incredible job. And we also still have extremely high expectations of these folks. And so maybe a shout out to all the folks who offer themselves to public service as another sign that there is something positive to seeing what's happening this evening.
Yeah, I appreciate that. A lot of people really don't realize the stress level that is involved in being a mayor or being the president of the board of the county board of supervisors, because every single day you worry about your community, your citizens. If anything happens on your watch, you're just really concerned, and you don't want anything bad to happen on your watch. And of course, while I was serving as mayor for during the last 7 months, we were faced with this great pandemic. And Natchez, Mississippi was the first city in the state of Mississippi to form a COVID-19 task force, even before the governor. We started putting things in place in order to protect our citizens. And it was a stressful period. And about a year before the end of my term, I decided that, hey, Daryl, it's time to move to something new. I'm 55 years old. I want to do something different in life. I've given 22 years of my life to public service. And, it was because of my love of my community. It certainly wasn't because of anything else. And I was just thankful that I had a wonderful career. And the citizens loved me. They were upset when I decided not to run again. And they decided to name a bridge after me before I left office.
Well, it's really interesting to have the three of you who are so hopeful and optimistic, and it does feel in some ways like the anguish and the trauma is in some ways like a painful passing of an era, and that and that a new day is coming. Do you think that's an accurate thing to say?
I would say a new day is coming. I do want to temper the optimism with, again, this idea of long-term perspective. I think in many ways, the mayor and Ashley and I, we certainly come to this conversation standing on the shoulders of and having the wind at our back of people who made sacrifices generations ago and more recently. And in all those instances, Suri, every example I can think of, it was a lifetime of service, it was a lifetime of sacrifice, but it was also a way of understanding that from generation to the next, good things are going to happen if we keep pushing the fight. And so it is the tension, I think, that Ashley talked about, that good things are happening because we can see it on the ground. We know who's organizing, we know who's activating, we know who is acting as outside players, right? Versus those of us who have the good fortune of being inside actors and try to be radical on the inside. That's good news. The bad news is, depending on how things swing tomorrow or in the next few weeks, locally and nationally, I have family members, I have staff, I have people I care deeply about who are going to be harmed. They are immigrants, they are on the LGBTQIA spectrum, they are Black and brown and Asian people, they are Native people, they are folks who have a litany of otherisms connected to their profiles, such as they've been placed at the margins. And this country's practices, both nationally and locally and at the state level, in many ways are attached to a sort of white supremacist framework that is showing up in the policy. It's not just a feeling or an individual affect. It is a set of policy decisions that are undermining the lives of people. And even while we do the long-term work, we are having to do the work. And I think it's really important for us to think about this from a practice and a policy perspective. What does it mean to sustain folk in this work while we're working towards the long-term goals?
Any last thoughts, Ashley or Mayor Grinnell?
I'm thinking about the people coming through the MPA program, the folks who've already signed up and the folks who will, because they see the amazing work that you guys are doing and the team that you all have built. And one piece of advice that I used to jokingly give all the time, and I now realize how much I mean it, I really do think everybody, like everybody in the country, should serve at least 12 months in local government. Because there is really understanding like the 72 different agendas that folks are holding around just one issue, right? And having to practice negotiating and being a bridge builder around those different agendas, and how to actually deliver work that matters inside of that tension is a critical skill. And I think that some of what we are feeling right now in this moment is because there's not, like, Flozell taught me years ago the importance of building muscle memory, right? And this is one of those spaces where if we practice enough, like really executing inside of that tension, and what it requires to build coalitions of unusual suspects and to help people to really understand perspectives that they don't hold, that aren't their own, that's the work for this next generation. And so I think that that's critically important. And then the last thing I will say is 4 years ago tomorrow, my son was 5 years old, and he saw the outcome of the election and he cried. We stood in a corner and just cried. And I didn't know what to do and what to say. And 4 years ago now, he is 9 and is not only is he fully self-expressed, but is clear about what he thinks should happen in the world and the country, and is empowered. Most importantly, he's empowered, right? And so I just want to share that as just a closing hopeful thought, that all is not lost, and at our best, no matter what happens, we are moved to action for the things that we believe in. And if a 9-year-old can do that, then certainly us grown folks can.
Yeah.
No, yeah, Mayor Grinnell.
I just totally agree with Flozell and Ashley. And I agree that more people need to get involved in local government, even if it's volunteerism, to get involved in that process. And, and I'm an optimist. Things will get better.
Thank you. Well, thanks for helping us to transcend this moment, whatever this moment might be. And I'll hand it back to Dr. Leak-Francis to wrap us up for the evening. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I can't even describe how much we appreciate your time.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you to our wonderful audience for hanging in here with us. I can't thank our panelists enough. You all brought so many valuable insights and just things to consider. And for this last segment, I really, truly appreciate how you all framed a path forward for us, how you gave us space to think about being intentional regardless of the outcomes. And all of the panelists, you did a wonderful job, and I think I couldn't end on a better note. So thanks to you all, and we truly, truly appreciate it. So thank you. I want to share, certainly the MPA came up as a part of a strategy, if you will, for a pathway forward. And we really would love to stay in contact with you. We need more civic professionals. We need more civic leaders to help us to form that more perfect union that we heard echoed throughout the evening. So please stay in contact with us in the chat. Krista shared the website for the MPA. It's sopa.tulane.edu/MPA. I'm going to share my screen one last time with our social media handles. You can follow us on Twitter, on Instagram, and we also have a presence on LinkedIn. If you just search Tulane SOPA, we'll pop up there. And I look forward to working with any of you who are interested in careers in government, in careers in the nonprofit sector, in careers in the private sector that make an impact in this way. Because that's what we're about. We're really about building community, strengthening our community, and serving the needs of those who need us the most. So I welcome you all to reach out to us to learn more about the MPA. So with that, I close out our evening, and I encourage you all to have a great rest of your evening, get some sleep, get some rest, try to wake up rejuvenated, and above all, take care of yourselves and be well. So good night. Thank you.